From the British Armed Forces and the Commonwealth, we come to Burkina Faso. News just came out that the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, has just rejected an IMF loan. Now, before now, I know that back in March, yes, I think that was, yes, I think it was March. There was in March and there was in June. So the IMF and Burkina Faso have been having conversation for loan. So the government can undertake some development projects within the country. So they've been having those. I know they've had two rounds of talks. They had one in March. They had one in June. Now this August, this week, Ibrahim Traore came out and said, "You know what? We don't want the IMF loan." So I don't know what the conversation they had was, and I don't know what the IMF was requesting behind the scene. But I know that the president has come out to say they are going to move on and look for how they can develop their country without getting loan from the IMF. Now, if you've watched this show for as long as we've been up, it just started in June 2024 is when I started this show. But if you've watched this show for any length of time, you know that I am not a fan of the IMF. I think the IMF causes more harm than it does good. I think the IMF is supposed to be branded, it's supposed to be branded an economic terrorist because the IMF completely impoverishes nations. So you already know that stand, but I want to really tell you my three major issues with the IMF. Number one, the IMF will trap you in debt. You are just going to be in a cycle of debt, and then you realize that the money you took as loan from them after making concessions and agreeing to their conditionalities. You have laid down, you have agreed to the conditionalities, but yet the money you took, it seems that you can't get anything done. So you're trapped in a cycle of debt. You're just taking debt to pay back, taking debt to pay back. At the end of the day, there's nothing you can use that money to do in your country. The IMF loan, IMF debt is never taken, if it was not intended for you to take it to be able to do something with it. That is number one issue, my number one issue with the IMF. My number two issue is that with all these conditionalities, you do not have economic sovereignty. They keep pushing and saying, like in the case of Nigeria, this recent one that we just saw, that it was the IMF that said Nigeria should remove fuel subsidy. It was the IMF that told us that we should increase tax. It was the IMF that told Nigeria to remove to increase the energy, like the electricity tariff. It was the IMF that told Nigeria to float the naira. We should not do capital controls in Nigeria. It was the IMF. We look at Kenya, the protest we saw in Kenya that nearly burnt the country to the ground. It was IMF. That tax that Ruto set into place was set into place with the instruction of the IMF. Let's go to the top of Africa. See what is going on in Egypt. And their currency is tanking. The cost of fuel, the cost of living, everything has skyrocketed is because they were implementing policies that the IMF asked them to. If we look in Ghana, the same story. We look in Ethiopia, it's the same story. All across the continent, it's the IMF. It's the IMF. So is this because of this instruction from IMF to do this and do that? Our nations in Africa, and not just in Africa, really any country that takes IMF loan, we do not have sovereignty to make economic decisions that will benefit the country and the people living in the country. That is my second issue with the IMF. The third one is that they have now left their economic terrorism. They, yes, I said it. They've now left their economic terrorism and they are coming out to do political terrorism. Now, it's not enough for the IMF to say we are going to hijack you economically. Now they're trying to hijack you culturally and politically. Look at what just happened with Uganda. Uganda was looking for a loan from the IMF, and the IMF and Uganda were agreeing to conditions laid down by the IMF. Then Uganda said, "Oh no, we cannot do LGBT. You can't make LGBTQ a national policy." Because of that, IMF said they're not going to give Uganda a loan. So now it's beginning to look like the IMF is and the money they are the loans they're supposedly giving is looking like this is now supposed to be they're using this to get to change your political systems and your cultural system. It's bad enough they've taken control of the economy. Now they are doing this with our politics and our culture. That's the problem with the IMF loans for me. And that is why Chinese loans are looking more favorable to African countries because they don't give you all this headache of things to do and things not to do. So this update from Burkina Faso has really piqued my interest because I want to see, I want to see what Burkina Faso does. We all know that in the context of global affairs. And even within Africa, Burkina Faso is not a rich country. It's not a rich country globally. It's not even one of the richest countries within Africa. So it's a really impoverished nation. And they are saying, let us jump out and do this thing ourselves. So I'm curious to see what happens with Burkina Faso. How are they going to navigate this? What do they? Because it's I really want to see, because how is it that Burkina Faso is going to experiment with this thing and show we other countries in Africa that, you know what, it's possible to do things for your country without trapping yourself to debt from the IMF. I want to read the quote of the president of Burkina Faso when he said that they're not going to proceed to get the loan from the IMF. Ibrahim Traore said, when he was speaking of rejecting the loans from the IMF, he said, Africa doesn't need Africa doesn't need the World Bank, IMF, Europe, or America. We have what it takes to grow our economy without loans and refuse to be financial slaves. That's inspiring. It's really inspiring what he said. So I want to see, now that he has decided, they in Burkina Faso have decided that let them chart a new course for their country outside of these Western, not just Western, but outside of these financial institutions that have a history filled with impoverishing nations, not just African countries. If you look in Asia, the same thing. If you look in places like in Europe, like Romania, the same story. So as they're coming out to chart this new course, hopefully they can show we other countries in Africa. You see, we can do this thing. And who knows, this system that Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso is going to lay down, who knows if this system is now going to prove so successful that we in the rest of Africa can implement it into our respective countries to get similar or maybe even better results. I'm really rooting for Burkina Faso because this president, Ibrahim Traore, is so inspiring. The things he wants to do for his country. Sometimes when I listen to him and all the big goals and the lofty things he's saying, you know, it's really inspiring. And I'm not surprised that some people who are not in favor of the independence of Africa, the economic independence of Africa, they've tried several times to assassinate him. He just escaped another assassination attempt. Then hopefully Burkina Faso will show the rest of Africa, because when one person gets it right, it can inspire others to do the same. When I spoke in the previous segment about the Commonwealth looking to recruit soldiers for the British Armed Forces, I mentioned the Accra riots that led to Ghana gaining independence. And when Ghana gained independence, what happened? Other African countries began to gain independence. So sometimes when one thing happens, it's not a secluded issue or a secluded affair. It can inspire others to follow the same route. If you look in Nigeria, for example, the Dangote refinery, against all odds, he's insisting, and I'm supporting him, he's insisting that the refinery works. And this, now that he's pushing, regardless of opposition, to get the refinery up and running, we just saw news that came out this week that Ghana is setting up its own refinery, mega refinery. That's good. Two African countries. And I'm saying that because the next thing you're going to see, the more successful Dangote is in with his refinery, and the more we're able to break this system of leaving Africa as just a place to export raw materials. Other African nations are beginning will get inspired to set up their refineries, to begin to add value to their raw materials within the continent. And this is the way Africa will get economic prosperity. So I'm really rooting for Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore, and I want to see the system they lay down working without loans from the IMF, the World Bank, and the rest of it. I want to see what they lay down, and this, who knows, and hopefully this can be a model for other African nations to adopt. The only problem is that I hope they allow him do it, because, like I said, there's been several attempts to take his life, several assassination attempts he has experienced in such a short time, to show you that what he's doing can work. And when it works, it will serve as a guiding light for other countries within the continent. So let me know what you think about this development in Burkina Faso, where Ibrahim Traore is saying no to the IMF loan. And then, in fact, you also mentioned the World Bank. Let me know what you think about this development in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with your friends and family, so that we can reach more people across the continent and the world.